Hi everyone, welcome to a really special episode of 33 Founders. Chase and I are excited to be with Alan Johnson this afternoon, the co-founder of Treehouse, an online education platform teaching people to code and connecting them to computer programming jobs. Thanks so much for joining us, Alan.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I want to start out simple and where we left off. Treehouse is all about inspiring people to code. What inspires you to code?
What inspires me to code? I always wanted to build things. I was the pretty prototypical engineer kid who took all his toys apart and, had a lot of people kind of influential around me that were electrical engineers and things like that in my childhood. And so that always led me to wanting to build things. I actually started started college at Clemson University as a electrical engineering major, and even though I had been programming for a very long time, I started programming when I was about 9. I never thought, this could actually be my career. It was always just that weird other thing I did sometimes. And so met a friend there who was in computer science and was like, I write this, and this, and do all these really cool things. And I was like, I do the same things. And he was kind of like, why aren't you a computer science major? This is a big deal that you can do this kind of stuff. And so I kind of thought about it. I was like, why am I not a computer science major? And so, kind of made the switch there. And that's kind of the long story about background. I mean, overall, every day, what kind of building things through my life and kind of making things, especially with code, has done is it's biased me towards solving problems that way. So now at this point, just when I see a problem, I say, how can I solve this with software? And, that tends to show up a lot throughout Treehouse and a lot through other parts of my life, just in terms of, what software can I use to solve this problem that I personally have or a problem that others have.
Very cool.
I love it. And so now, before we dive in too deep, I want to say that your website is gorgeous, and it better be with the work that you're doing. But so please tell me what the process was like, first of all. Like, how many iterations of mockups did you go through? How'd you make that amazing site?
So with the Treehouse site, I mean, honestly, it's not... So it's infinity iterations, basically. Like, I can't tell you how many iterations it's been. We've been working on Treehouse since 2010, and it's just, we learn things over time, and they've applied. We're weird in that we don't really have a super formal design process like maybe a lot of companies do. We have a little formality with our design team in terms of like, hey, I think here's a problem. Let's actually try to state the problem really clearly. Hey, here's how I propose that I solve the problem. Let's try to state that solution really clearly. But beyond that, we don't have like some of our designers do mock-ups, some of them don't. I mean, in terms of how they work, some of our designers do things in Photoshop, and some of them go straight to markup. Like it's an individual thing, like a lot of how our company works. And so there's no super clear answer there. I mean, short of, I think we have this problem, let's work on it, and here's my solution to this problem. Almost everything has had a different kind of experimental process that's pushed it through. And as we've learned, we've basically seen that it comes down to those two things: state the problem and state your solution.
And now a big part of Treehouse user success is the target-based approach. So what's the effectiveness of badges and achievements?
We had that really clearly quantified when we transitioned from Think Vitamin membership to Treehouse. It was really interesting. That was the point in time at which we could say really easily, like, okay, like, we didn't do badges and we had these numbers, and then now that we do badges, we have these numbers. And it was about double. Like, our students stuck around and they learned about twice as much once we added some gamification elements. We've improved that with points and a few other things. We think we've improved that by having a community where people can interact with each other and they can see each other's achievements. And we have a lot of other goals on that front that we haven't necessarily shared with anybody yet. And so in terms of quantity and kind of quantifying that, we know up front it doubled things right off the bat, and so it was a really big deal. And then, over time, it's only gotten better as we've been able to iterate and refine.
Doubled is great.
Yeah.
So now, this next question is probably like picking your favorite child, but what would you say is the best course to learn for beginner and best for advanced?
So, most of the people that I know who work in software, for whatever reason, work in the web. It's probably somewhat selection bias because I come from a web development background. But I think, the majority of people you bump into are going to say, like, I do something with the web. From that regard, I pretty much always tell people start with front end. Like, learn your HTML, learn your CSS. That's not necessarily real programming. But then dig into your JavaScript and learn, take that path, because that's the easiest way to communicate with somebody else with software. We live in a world where, for whatever reason, we communicate over the web so much. Like, that's just where we've ended up. From there, you have to kind of pick your poison, and it's not an easy decision in terms of where you go to the back end. Like, we teach PHP, Ruby, and Python, and we're working on our first Java course right now, because we've had a lot of students ask about that. And so, from the back end standpoint, I love Ruby. That's my favorite thing to do. But I can't really say very well, like, oh yeah, you ought to do this. I think it comes down to personal preference, and I'd probably tell somebody, give each one, maybe do the first Treehouse course on each one and get a feel for which one you like the most, or look at where your community is. If you have a lot of friends that are already doing PHP, do PHP, because you're going to get more support that way, and you're going to probably be able to stick with it longer, because of that kind of circle of friends you have.
Yeah, and our site's built on Ruby too. So what are some of the benefits of Ruby?
So ultimately, the differentiator, I think, for Ruby is expressiveness. For whatever reason, Matt's decided that Ruby would look a lot like natural language. That doesn't always hold true, and there are definitely some weird spots where it leaves you scratching your head, because he kind of emphasizes that, even like, oh, I wanted it to read like a person speaking, but then you look at some things and you're like, wow, that doesn't look anything like a person speaking. But for the most part, they do a really good job with that, and I think that ultimately, when you boil it all down, that's what Ruby's about, is expressiveness. Now, going a bit further, I think like the Rails ecosystem is amazing, and the fact that for whatever reason, like big web frameworks, Ruby has gone to one major web framework. Like, that constraint helps the Ruby world a lot, because like, what do I build a web app with? Well, yeah, you might do Sinatra, but 9 out of 10 times you're probably going to build a Rails app, and that's probably the majority of the discussion you're going to have. Hopefully, I'm not like saying that and you're like, oh, well, we built ours with this other thing. But yeah, I mean, so I think those two things have really, those aren't like technological achievements by any means, for Ruby, but just that constraint and that expressiveness have added up to being something that works for a whole lot of people.
Great. So, Alan, I want to shift gears for a couple of minutes and talk about some initiatives you guys have to really push your mission of empowering people to code forward. So the first one I want to talk about is the Change the Ratio campaign that you guys just started. Can you tell us about that initiative and what you're hoping to accomplish with it?
Yeah, so, I mean, overall, we, gender in technology is just, it's a hot button issue right now. There's a lot of discussion about it. It would be easy for somebody to go out and say, hey, like, let's talk about this because it's going to be really good for PR or really good for whatever. But it's something that we've been talking about for a long time. And I think that just, right now we're trying to formalize that a little bit and really kind of take really clear steps to being very open about how Treehouse looks at that. We think that software is ultimately how people of the future are going to express themselves. By that regard, it would be a total travesty to build a world where huge swaths of the population aren't allowed to express themselves, right? Like, it would be what so many other battles have been fought over in terms of either socially or real legit people shooting guns at each other battles. Like, this is a big deal. And so, you know, for us with Change the Ratio, it's one of kind of many steps we'll be taking just to look at, you know, what does the tech community look like? What does the design community look like? How can Treehouse help by making education more available to the kind of people that need to be better represented in those communities? And how can we make sure that like people worldwide understand that this is how we're going to communicate in the future? So you need to be connected to that. You know, like it's not a negative thing. It's not a like there aren't, you know, it's not a thing where we're just like, oh, there aren't enough women in software. Like it's not just that. It's like, how do we make sure that software is a way that women communicate just like men communicate with it in these like kind of unfair or biased ratios right now? It's the way I would communicate it.
Absolutely, and I know a part of that, Alan, is advocating for young women not to go to college. With the statistic that people with degrees have a lot higher paying jobs, how do you guys approach that with the initiative?
Yeah, so that's always an interesting topic because I think a lot of people take what we say a little further than we say it. What we advocate is not don't go to college. It's you don't have to go to college to work in this field. The Treehouse team, I can't give you the exact stats right now, but the last time I looked at the numbers, we're about 50% college grads, about 50% not. I definitely very much enjoyed my college experience, and there were some things that it was very beneficial to me in, and probably like income is one of those. At the same time, like it's something that people do that can very often end up leaving them with a lot of problems in their life. It can leave them with a lot of debt, and it's also a very especially with software, you go to a university, you do things that look nothing like developing software in real life, and then we somehow say that that's the way you decide if you want to be a software developer. At Treehouse, we're trying to set up a world where you can say like, hey, I'm interested in this software thing. Why don't I go try it out on Treehouse? Actually see what it's all about for $25 a month for a few months. If I decide I don't like it, no big deal. Like I spent $75 on this instead of $100,000. And then I move on to something else. So, you know, I would say like, I would never tell anybody don't go to college. Like I have 3 kids. I hope they all go to college. Like that's the way the world is wired right now. What I would tell somebody though is if that debt looks really terrifying to you, if you're not sure what you want to do yet, if you think that the world is a bigger place than just a place where people who do go to college can fit in, then like Treehouse is probably one of many opportunities for you. And I would definitely promote that they take the time to really think seriously about that 100, 60, whatever thousands of dollars of debt it is. And you know, look at that in the scale of like in the scheme of where they want their life to go. That's all I would say. We're definitely not anti-college. We're pro making people, or we're pro asking people to make good decisions. I guess that's the way I would look at it.
And I think go ahead, Jason.
You go ahead.
One of the ways you guys are doing that, encouraging them to make good decisions, is with your Code to Work initiative, and that's to get 150,000 people in computer programming jobs by 2018. Can you tell us about that one too? Yeah, totally.
So the kickoff on that is Code to Oregon. The basic idea is that you know, we're working with a local organization called Work Systems that they're part of a huge network nationally of these things called workforce investment boards. The general idea is whenever you hear that a government talk about jobs, like workforce investment boards is one of the big things that they do to try to make jobs work. So this is retraining, it's, you know, unemployment, it's those kinds of things. The people from Work Systems here in Oregon came to us and they were like, we're really interested in Treehouse, and we're really interested in finding out, you know, how we can connect the education that a student could get at Treehouse to a shortfall that we're seeing in developer positions here in Portland. I think the last number I saw was there are 740 open software positions, like developer and design positions in Portland, specifically relating to software. And they basically don't know how they're going to fill them. Like there aren't enough people here to fill them. And people are talking about that nationwide. The scale changes depending on who you talk to and what month they do the study. But the general gist is there's a shortage of people who can actually fill all these technology jobs that are needed. So here in Oregon, what we did is we basically said, okay, like we'll work with you, and we made available 10,000 spots where someone who wants to retrain or train for the first time as a programmer or as a designer can come and learn to code with us at Treehouse. And then they'll also be connected to Work Systems, this local organization that's very tapped into the hiring situation here in Oregon, to help them then take that from learning to code to getting a job in software. Overall, with Code to Work, I mean, our attitude is just what it sounds like. Like, let's take somebody who doesn't know how to code, let's teach them how to code, and then let's turn that into a lifelong career. That has two steps though, and that's one thing that a lot of people overlook. Like, there's the step of teaching somebody how to code. A lot of people are doing that. There's another step, which is, okay, there aren't enough people to fill these positions that are available. How do we actually get companies to look at people who don't have 5 years of programming experience and say, you know what, like, what we need to do is so important, like this thing we're building is so important that we'll actually take somebody and invest in them and take them from, like, we're not saying bring somebody in off the street but that doesn't know how to code, but we're just saying take somebody who doesn't have 5 years of experience but instead has 6 months of experience but is building things, does know how to code, and you help them get that experience so that they can build a career and you can build the thing you want built. And so that's the big picture, is can we change the mindset of society at large to say, hey, this coding thing is something I should really look into, and can we change the mindset of employers at large to say, you know what, like, we'll take a risk on somebody who's maybe a little less experienced so that we can build these things we want to build, we can do these projects we want to do.
So your career resource center is really, really cool. I want to know though, at what point did you realize that this would be a crucial piece of your work?
That came up. So as we started working with students who are completing Treehouse curriculum and started trying to connect them to jobs, our first stab was, a lot of software people. We're a lot of software people, so we're like, oh, we're just gonna build this thing. We're like, we'll have a job board and we'll have this thing where you can find people and it's just gonna magically work. It was the total, if you build it, they will come, and it was a bad idea. So then we went back to the drawing board and we started just talking to people and saying, how do we make this really work? How do we make it where somebody who studies can get a position in software? And we saw that we weren't completing these baby steps that you had to complete to get a job, like make a resume, actually go out and talk to some people, like get a Twitter account, because in our community that's a big deal. Set up a GitHub account and make sure that you're posting some stuff there. Set up a portfolio site. And so, we decided, hey, like a really great step on that is just to document all that for people so that we can send our students there and say, hey, there are all these other things you need to do. We're looking into some more interesting ideas connecting to that to make that process even easier for students, and also make it even easier for us to kind of help students in that regard. That's something we're super excited about.
Cool. What are some of the companies that have hired your students?
It's all over. Like a couple of weeks ago, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had a student get hired by Google, which was crazy. Like, we did not expect that.
Awesome.
The thing I would say though is it is not, the vast majority are not big software companies. Just like the vast majority of programmers you meet do not work for big software companies. It's a lot of people who work for that agency in town that has 20 people on the team. That's kind of the bulk of who students have gotten connected with, and that's on a mix of like us actually working really actively with students to get new positions, but also this just kind of organic students coming back to us and saying, hey, I got a job in software at this company here locally because, and either some say because of Treehouse and some say because of Treehouse and all these other things that I did that kind of added up to me improving my career.
Yeah,
So
it's all over
so
Quora.
Rewarding.
It's awesome.
So So I really want to talk about your culture now and your team.
Okay.
Because since I learned about Treehouse, I don't think I've stopped talking about everything you guys are doing. So I saw on Tommy's blog that you guys have a 4-question and project model that you use when you're hiring people.
Yes.
And Tommy actually noted that you created it, and the first question of the 4 questions is, why do you want to work at Treehouse?
Yes.
And I was really surprised because he said that that's actually one of the ways you guys eliminate a lot of potential hires. So what's the importance to you, Alan, of a great first impression?
So that has a lot less to do with first impressions and a lot more to do with the way, well, it's partly a first impression, I guess, because it's our first question, but I would not say that's the reason that question works so well is because of the traditional first impression kind of concept.
Is it value alignment?
It's totally value alignment. So the number one thing that will tell us if somebody's going to be a great team member at Treehouse is how much they care about our mission. I'll give away the secret, but we have other things in our interview process that help us with this. If somebody comes and they say, hey, like, I really want to work at Treehouse because you guys have a 4-day work week, that's almost immediately a bad sign with that person. And there will usually be other things that point out that that's a bad sign through the process. It goes the same with you pay really well, or, you have all these other perks or whatever. You have a flat structure. All of that kind of says, hey, this is not great. What we want to hear is that somebody really cares about our students. They don't know our students yet, but like the idea that they can imagine caring about our students and that they care about society at large, making technology education really affordable and accessible. Ultimately that question, I would say, yes, it's a first impression, sort of, but it's not the traditional, like, oh yeah, like put your best foot forward. It's totally like, we want to hear that you're one of these weird people like the Treehouse people. And that's the number one thing. Like our team, people look different, they act different, but they all care about that one thing really strongly.
So once they do get hired, between the 4-day work week and the absence of managers, they really have the life. Can you tell us, without you telling us the catalyst, let me start that over. Can we start out with you telling us the catalyst behind these kinds of decisions?
Yeah, so 4-day work week existed before I did. Ryan ran a company called Carsonify back in the day. When he started it, he was working his butt off, and his wife Jill, who was kind of considered the co-founder of Carsonify back then, Jill was like, you're working really hard and it seems to make no sense in the point of starting your own business, being able to control your own life. And so Ryan decided to make a conscious effort to work 4 days a week, on the basis that if he tried to compress everything that he needed to do in the week into those 4 days, he would have some really clear guidelines for his life. The 4-day work week, I don't think it works really well because we did some scientific study and found out that number of hours is the perfect number of hours for humanity to work. But it's a matter of it's different. And so it makes you think about it. It's a matter of it being a guideline that causes pause for someone. And we feel really strongly that, overall, people should have boundaries between their time with their family or their time with their friends and their time with team members and their time spent on work. So that was that one. It has the specific story of Ryan, but it works, I think, really well just because it's a boundary and it makes people think about things. To be completely honest, we have tons of people who work on the weekends because they love what they do. And we have some people like our side ops team that they get paged on the weekend and they just have to fix something. And our support team helps people on the weekends. We have somebody pretty much always on support. So, it's definitely still colored. We're not crazy. Like it's a thing that it works a certain way, but it's not maybe as black and white as, oh, well, people only work Monday to Thursday. Like we're a company and we're practical just like anybody else. That said, we do by and large all work 32 hours, 4 days a week. And that's how it happens.
So the 4-day work week isn't a Tim Ferriss book.
No, it is not a Tim Ferriss book. It is a very practical thing. it works really well, and I think we definitely work less than most people do, but we also work very hard to fit what we need to get done in a week into those 4 days, and that's the flip side of it. It's kind of a work hard, play hard thing. With the no manager thing, thankfully I was around and I was part of that decision. When we were kind of growing at around 40 or so people, we started to see some really interesting things appear, especially relating to just company structure. Our structure thus far had grown pretty organically, and we started to have this like, oh, well, we have these people that are managers because everybody needs somebody to talk to, and then like, oh wow, we're getting so many managers that do the managers need managers, and at that point we were just kind of like, wow, this is getting really kind of weird. Let's take a step back and try to be deliberate about what we're doing here. So we did this thing where we actually had a trip to Orlando, where we have 2 offices, one in Portland, one in Orlando. So we had a trip to Orlando anyway. We got together with the team there, and we were kind of like, hey, this is what we're looking at. We feel like these things are getting kind of strange. We would like to be deliberate and say instead that like we respect everybody enough to let them make their own decisions on things. And so, with that, there are definitely some areas that we have some responsibility to. I mean, we've raised money, and so we have responsibility to our shareholders there that, Ryan, and Mike Watson, who's our CFO, we're still basically really in charge of money because we have to be responsible with that. And that's it's a thing where we have a process whereby folks can come and say, hey, I need money to do this. And we'll talk about it. And there are a few other things where we still have a lot of structure attached to it because of how it works. But overall, I think there's this spectrum, right, in life where you work for somebody. On one side of the spectrum, they have no control over you because at any time you can leave. And the way America works, thankfully, is it's that way. Like anytime you can leave. There's the flip side of like they have a lot of control over you because you have to eat and all these other things. And so, my perspective is let's try to find ways to fit on that spectrum in the proper place. And like, where's reality on that? For our team, it's not having a lot of structure and letting people throw ideas around like crazy and having a lot of chaos that comes together at the last minute. Other companies, that's probably not really good based on the way the team's composed. And honestly, I don't know what our team will look like when we're 1,000 people. Like, will it still work there? But trying to reflect more of reality and trying to reflect both the freedom and constraints that everybody has led to what we did.
So then, Alan, is the goal of the leadership dynamic then that everybody is a leader or nobody is a leader?
It's that everybody's a leader in some ways. We talk a lot about that. It's not about managing, it's about leading. Like, what's that one thing that you understand better than anybody else, and you can really plant a flag and say, this is my thing that I get, and you should rally around this. Sometimes folks don't have necessarily the respect on the team to be able to do that. Like, it's a weird dynamic because you can definitely harm your relationships with others to the point where you plant that flag and everybody says, I'm going to this other flag. That's been an interesting aspect of it. But honestly, it's what happens with management, right? Like, you have a management team, somebody on that team loses the respect of their group and things fall apart. And so, our perspective has been that, we want to see people lead, but we also want to have these natural pressures that help us understand, why they're leading and make that leadership something where, they're leading because people respect them and they're following.
Very cool.
So a lot of your success then has to do with this open communication and productivity. How do you encourage that?
A few ways. We have, some of it's the normal stuff. We use Hip Chat for just like being able to hang out with each other. We do a lot of Google Hangouts and things like that. One of the big things is we have an app called Canopy that helps us all communicate with each other really well. So we used to have Convoy. I don't know why it's all C names, And we just rolled out Canopy about a week ago, and it's kind of like the next iteration. The rough idea is it's something like Reddit, where you can post things and then people can talk about it. Canopy has changed that a good bit because we realized that we needed to, that like the having with Convoy, it was all a fire hose, and there was a lot of information being passed around, and it got to be too much with there being 72 of us. And so Canopy kind of like channels that a little bit more. You can see anything that goes on in Canopy, but you maybe don't see it because you don't need to on a particular day. It takes a little more exploration to see everything, I guess is maybe the way to say it. And so, those are some things, like we definitely invest in software to help the team. I think, another big way is just, being really deliberate about going to people and kind of pushing for the kind of behavior that you need to see. Sometimes that just means having a candid talk with somebody about how they collaborated with somebody else. Sometimes that's things like our review process, where the way we do our reviews is we basically say, okay, it's time for reviews. Figure out who you need to review based on who you've worked with, and then come in and give them feedback. Some of that's quantitative, some of that's qualitative, and you basically have this field where we say, hey, tell them whatever you want to tell them. We're going to copy and paste that directly. And so, we have multiple layers of give your peers feedback, have really open communication, and we've seen that really, kind of drive that really well, honestly, for the compared to my fears of where like this whole flat thing could go and where it is, it's been amazing.
So I think one of the main ways you've been able to achieve that, Alan, is running your company the way you want to run it. And you've discussed that a lot, that founders should run their company how they want to run it, because it's their company. I'm not sure I'd be able to do what you've done, though, and have a 4-day work week and eliminate managers. So how do you encourage both yourself personally and your team to take the leap and just do things what works for you?
Yeah, so I would first say that, it's a founder thing, but it's also a company thing. It goes beyond founders. It's not just founders should do what they want to do. Everybody can deal with it. It's the company as a whole should have an identity that isn't predicated on the identity of every other company out there. I think a lot of companies look very similar at a distance. And I think that's a bad thing. I think more companies should have unique identities. Just like if you looked at a crowd, you would see people dressed differently and things like that. So that's one piece. In terms of just telling people, I think all I could do is say from my experience, from the experience at Treehouse that Ryan and I have had, there's very little risk. There are so few decisions you can make that you can't come back from. And you just have to keep that in mind. This flat thing, when we all talked about it, we were like, we're going to do this, and we're going to make a big deal out of it. But if it fails, we're going to turn around really fast, and we're going to figure out what else works. So just having that understanding that there's almost nothing that you can't undo. And then I think ultimately just understanding your own responsibility to yourself and to the world to do the best you can. If you're in a situation where you're all tied up about a decision, usually when you do that, it's because you have the thing you want to do and the thing that you think you should do. You have to ultimately kind of say what's best for the world, what's best for everybody around me, and then go for it. Because being really locked up and struggling usually doesn't have much value in the long term. You can learn a lot from it, but usually you learn a lot more from actually taking a step. And so, I would just say, look at us. We haven't had any problems, and we've done some really crazy stuff. And then beyond that, I would say, just realize that ultimately you have to look back and be okay with what you did. And so you spending your life all torn about what you should do is probably not what you want to look back on.
Very true. So you've talked a lot about the learning process and experimenting, and I know you guys have a great board of directors. What are you learning from them?
Specifically who, Jenna?
I love Shamat, so I'd love to know what you've learned from him.
Shamat's really cool. I like Shamat a lot. But it's interesting because I think one of the things that Chamath does really well is let us learn on our own. So overall, I remember when we were raising money, like looking around and seeing a post by Chamath on like TechCrunch or somewhere, or maybe it was about Chamath. But it was basically like, hey, our strategy is that we leave people alone. And, you know, I would say overall when we had particular reasons that we were raising money. It was not to build up some big expertise, like some big board that was an oracle that could help us through everything. Chamath has absolutely helped us through a lot of things. And he's a great guy. And, you know, I have a lot of respect for what he's done throughout kind of his career, both in tech and then as a VC. But at the same time, like, I think he would say even that the way, you know, the best thing that he can kind of do is let us make the decisions that feel right for us. And he's done that 100%. So, I mean, I would say the best way he's helped us learn is by letting us make our own mistakes and learn.
All right. Now I have about 14 more questions for you, but I know you have a world to change. So let's close with this then. What's the story that you want to tell your grandkids about Treehouse?
No pressure here.
No pressure. That's really hard. You know, overall, I think a lot about just the big picture. So if I were going to tell my grandkids something, let's pretend they're 10 years old. They're sitting, or let's make them a little younger because that seems more appropriate for people sitting on your lap. I have a 4-year-old granddaughter sitting on my lap. I think the thing I would tell her more than anything is just like the value of doing work that is meaningful to you. The first startup I worked with was an insurance startup. The second one was in kind of like, actually I'm getting that wrong. The first one was almost like Yelp, but before anybody thought Yelp would be something that anybody could do. The second one was an insurance startup. The third was a developer tool startup. And now I'm working at Treehouse. Of the 4, this is not to say that any of those other things weren't meaningful, but of the 4, this is the one that every day I kind of wake up and I feel like, yeah, it's time to do this. And I think that's really important. Like for me personally, it's been a big deal because it's not hard to be motivated. Like yay, we get 4-day work weeks and all this stuff, but you know, you can still wake up in the morning and not want to work. And so like having that thing that kind of just keeps driving you forward is a big deal. And ultimately, you know, I think what I've learned through all this and what I would tell said 4-year-old granddaughter sitting on my knee is that like she should do what she wants to do, like, and she should find ways to do it. You know, I'm not going to get into the big, like, do what you love and passion and all this, but I just think like building the life you want to have and making it meaningful, whether it's meaningful because you pour your life into your kids or you pour your life into your family, beyond that, whatever it is, your friends, just build the life you want and really strive for that, and things are going to go pretty well.
I love that. Build the life you want.
Future Grandpa Alan is doing some pretty cool things. So now let's officially close then with how everyone can find you online.
Yeah, so I'm Common Dream, not plural, on Twitter. I actually don't have a Facebook account, so don't try to approach me there. And then I'm at commondream.net is my site, but the most important thing you could do is go to teamtreehouse.com and check it out.
Awesome.
Do it, guys. It's amazing.
Thank you so much for joining us, Alan.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.